Welcome to What If, So What, the podcast where we ask what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real in your business. I'm Jim Hertzfeld.
And I'm Kim Chopek. We're part of Perficient's digital strategy team, and today we'll ask what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Here at What If, So What, we've talked to several marketers about how digital trends are influencing marketing in general, transforming digital marketing techniques, and forcing the evolution of the CMO role. But when it comes to who really gets stuff done on your marketing team, it's the rank and file. If you're not a member of that team, maybe you don't know what it really takes to bring a product to market. If you are a member of that team, chances are you find yourself responding to a host of demands, and some may be in emerging areas of marketing you don't know anything about, and you're expected to know. This makes for a critical inflection point in the discipline of marketing today as companies look for unique ways to tell their story and bring products to market, relying on teams of marketers who are being asked to deliver on far more than they ever have. Today, we talked to Mike Bernard, Vice President of Product and Customer Marketing at Optimizely, about how you bring products to market in today's digital space and what kind of team you need to be successful. Mike, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you today.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here.
So let's just start by having you give us a summary of your background, how your career has evolved as marketing organizations have evolved. And really, I'm interested in hearing your perspective on any notable points of inflection, either for you in your career or marketing as a practice and a discipline.
To answer that question, it's been a little serpentine with my career there, as I feel like most people have in marketing. I rarely meet folks in marketing who have actual degrees in marketing, but maybe that's kind of the nature of the beast there. But yeah, I actually started out my career a long time ago working in government, and then had switched over to doing nonprofit. And my first foray into marketing was actually in the nonprofit space. So how do you attract people who you're trying to reach out to? Specifically for me, I was working on affordable housing issues, obviously a very important topic, especially today, but like how do we provide the resources we need for folks who are looking for affordable housing and need access to services? So that's kind of how I got started in marketing. But for the past 12 or so years, I've been actually in the tech community. And then you're like, well, how do you go from doing nonprofit stuff to doing tech? And the reality is I got laid off. We lost our largest grant, and they had to let go of about half of the organization. And so I was scrambling for a job and basically applying anywhere that would take me, and ended up getting a job at a tech company that I think now is somehow bubbled up into Salesforce somewhere after multiple acquisitions, but walked in on the first day and they're like, Mike, we're really glad you're here. We bought this thing called Marketo. Go figure it out. And that was sort of my foray into tech marketing and marketing operations, demand gen. And I fell in love. I fell in love with technology companies. I fell in love with what organizations could do with technology. And then how do you drive the marketing that supports that? So yeah, that's been my deal. Currently, I am the Vice President of Product and Customer Marketing at Optimizely. And so as part of that, I lead obviously product marketing, customer marketing, but also developer marketing and global events all report up into me. And at Optimizely, for the listeners who don't know, we are a leading provider of digital experience software. So think about the tools that organizations use to provide that digital experience for their users or for their customers. So CMS, e-commerce, experimentation tools, and then all the other tools that support that, like CDP and marketing automation. We kind of have a little bit of everything, and really happy to be talking to the great folks at Perficient, who is a wonderful partner of ours in that pursuit at Optimizely.
Well, it's funny that you just rattled off a bunch of different platforms that used to be pretty, independent, and some of them, I would say, mutually exclusive. Fast forward to today, they're very often one platform, multi-purpose, and what organizations are looking for. And one of the reasons that we were so excited to have you on the podcast and get your perspective is we've talked a lot about marketing in general on the podcast. We've talked a lot about product development, but we've talked very little about what it takes to bring a digital product to market. And, as you were kind of talking through the different platforms, yes, I'm aware of them. But even today, we get questions. Now, what exactly is a CDP? Now, do I really need a CMS? Wait a minute, what's a DAM? And I think sometimes when we're inside the digital world, we take for granted that a lot of that is just known. but it's still not, right? And I have to imagine that it takes a lot to not only bring these products to market, but just help people understand the value proposition. What are the traits of a good product marketer, in your opinion? What do you look for in your role?
Yeah, no, I love that question because, well, first of all, product marketing in tech is one of the hottest jobs out there. So if you go on LinkedIn, you'll probably see about 800 million postings for product marketers at various tech companies. And I know as someone who tries to hire these folks, it is tough out there. So it is becoming a very high in demand area. But in terms of like, what do I look for? There's a few things. First of all, the number one thing that I look for is basically what I would call like a deep curiosity about the world. And the reason why I think that is so important, because product marketing is this weird mix that sits kind of in between the technical side of the organization and the go-to-market. And so in some ways, we don't have a home, but yet we're also the glue that brings these kind of two different areas of the business together. And so as a result of that, I think that the people who make the best product marketers are those who are really, really curious about everything. And so that curiosity tends to also then drive things like hustle and this attitude of getting stuff done and all these things that people want in a really great employee. But it's out of this desire to solve problems, to investigate stuff, and to kind of see opportunity where maybe others don't see opportunity. And so trying to unpack that or unlock that when you're talking to a candidate is something that I look for, because that's one of those skills that I don't think you can teach. And if you can find it in someone, you grab onto that person right away. That's number one. I think also what makes for a good product marketer is obviously you need to be able to communicate. And you need to be able to communicate both the technical side. So there's a technical aptitude to be able to understand what's going on with a product and sort of the depth of knowledge you need to have to be able to then communicate on the other side with other stakeholders. And that includes internal folks like your salespeople, your BDR and SDR function, others in the marketing department. That's kind of your internal audience. And then the external audience of your customers who are going to ultimately buy whatever it is that you're selling. And so that communication is really important. And the ability to communicate in multiple mediums is becoming more and more important in product marketing. It was okay to just be a decent writer or a decent PowerPoint slide maker. That got you by maybe even up to 3-4 years ago. But as we move increasingly into a more and more digital world, the ability to communicate in those mediums, but also to boil things down and be succinct and be clear with other mediums such as podcasts or videos is becoming more and more important. And there's folks who are more comfortable in certain mediums. And so to find somebody who's well-rounded, who can kind of do a little bit of everything is also really important. I think the next trait that I look for is someone who's got a deep, burning passion for the customer, someone who just finds a way to fall in love with every customer. And so a story I like to tell is I actually came to Optimizely through an acquisition. So Optimizely acquired our company, which the application that we made is now the foundation of our B2B commerce application. And you guys at Perficient know that really well because you're one of our top SIs in terms of helping customers stand up this application. But this particular application, we sold it primarily to folks in manufacturing and wholesale distribution. And so you might be thinking, oh, distribution, that like, aren't those the people who sell like plumbing supplies and like electrical wiring and HVAC equipment? Yes, it's them. It's those guys. It's those organizations. And when I came in to take on the marketing role for this, I'm like, what? I don't know anything about plumbing distributors. What? But I found a way to fall in love with them. When you start reading their stories and you start finding out more about them, you quickly learn that many of these organizations have been in business for 100 years, 75 years. Many of them are family-run organizations or on their third or fourth or fifth generation family member who is running the thing. They've provided great jobs, been a kind of a pillar of the community. They sponsor the local softball team, that kind of thing. And you quickly realize that these are the organizations that help build America. Like you don't build a skyscraper or build an apartment complex without having the distributor in place there and being able to provide the supplies and the materials that a builder needs to be able to build a building. And so as I dug into it and I start to explore it, I deeply fell in love with wholesale distributors, the backbone of America. kind of thing. And I think you need that in a product marketer. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. If it's something like sexy and flashy, like tech or automotive or, or airlines or something like that, that's maybe a little bit flashy, or bread and butter kind of stuff like wholesale distribution, you've got to find that way to tap into how you can like literally fall in love with the customer and what they're trying to do as a business. So at the end of the day, if you can find someone who is deeply curious, is really passionate about the customer, and can communicate in multiple mediums and be able to digest really technical stuff and then communicate it like you would to an eighth grader at the end of the day so that people can understand it, you've got a recipe for a really outstanding product marketer on your hands.
I love that. That was a very comprehensive and complete set of skills for a good product marketer. I, in particular, love the wholesale distribution love affair idea because I think that industry is probably the most ripe for innovation, the most ripe for digital products to transform the industry. And it seems to me that if you do have a good product marketer, they're going to help them realize how innovative the product could help the distribution or manufacturer, whatever the case is, really differentiate in their particular area of the market.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And obviously, we don't want to go down a whole long discussion about manufacturing distribution. I could talk for hours on that, but you're absolutely right. You started off this discussion talking about even within a large organization, they don't always know what a CDP or a DAM is. Well, that is so true in some of these industrial businesses. They're really good at serving their customers, at providing really good prices, providing good advice, the things that have allowed them to be successful for multi-generations, for 75 years. Like they're really good at that. And the world shifted around them. And this started happening before COVID, but it became really, really apparent once COVID hit that the world shifted, and it shifted really quickly. And now the owner or the CEO or the president of the organization lies in bed at night and goes, I hope I can pass this on to my son or my daughter or my niece or my nephew, but I'm not sure. There's a lot of competitive pressure out there from other organizations. Amazon comes to town and you're like, oh no, what do I do? Or the competitor down the street has made a move to digital and they haven't done it yet. But it's not something they're necessarily good at or skilled at because they haven't had to do that as part of their business for many years. And that's where I get really excited about a company like Optimizely and the work that Perficient does is we can come alongside an organization like that and say, hey, you're really good at what you do. We're actually really good at what we do. Let's partner together and be able to provide this new area for your business to grow in and to get you up to speed in a now digital world that sort of everyone expects. And yeah, I get really excited about whether it's a distributor or it's that kind of legacy business that's been around for 50 years and now the world is different and they're trying to figure out what do I do in this new different world. And that's one of the many reasons why I love working in tech is because we get to be able to work with those kinds of organizations and say, you know what, we can help. And not just because I want to sell you something. I want to sell you something. That's what pays the bills, right? But really what I want to do is I want to help you be successful. And I have some tools that I think actually would provide value to your organization.
And I think that's really interesting kind of transitioning to how you do that. So, you're not building the product. Your team isn't building the product. You're bringing it to market and you're figuring out how to tell that story, the story that you just told. Like, let us help you take this product and revolutionize or remodel your business. But when you think about the skill set that you just articulated and how, ultimately you make that sale, get to that story, convince them that the story is a good story. How do you back up from there and operationalize product marketing? We've talked to a lot of marketers who can speak to, here's what I think it takes to be a good CMO. Here's what I think it takes to be a good social media manager. And that's good. But, a lot of our listeners are always very curious about, but like, how does the sausage get made? So can you share some practices that you found to be very successful when it comes to really, truly operationalizing product marketing?
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing this probably differs in different organizations. So I can kind of speak to what we do at Optimizely and more from a software background. If you've got listeners that are, different types of businesses, it may be a little bit different. But from my standpoint, this is maybe one of the hardest parts of the job because like I said before, we're kind of this no man's land, but we're also this glue between two different areas of the business. And so you've got to get it right. And there's a lot of different stakeholders who need different types of information at different times. And so that's one of the areas that myself and my team has worked really hard on at getting better at. Obviously, there's still more that we can do, but this is not always the easiest part of the job. So I just want to put that out as a caveat because if there's others out there listening who are like, oh, we're so bad at this, you're probably not alone. There's others who are bad at this as well.
Right. Yep.
But first of all, it starts with project management. And so this is where all those traits I described earlier around the passion for the customer and being able to communicate, those don't always naturally jive with someone who's a gifted project manager.
Well said.
Different skills. So you either need to figure out systems to help facilitate that so that people can have things like checklists or timelines, that kind of stuff, or get someone who is nominated or dedicated or assigned the job of being that project manager, because managing all of the different things that are needed out there can, depending on the size of a launch or a release, can really consume quite a bit of time. So project management is super essential. Out of that project management, you need to develop what we call a BOM or a bill of materials. So like, what are the deliverables we need to be able to do this? So in product marketing, for example, it may be that there are multiple bill of materials. So maybe for phase one, for sales enablement, we need a sales deck. We need a one-pager. We need 2 customer stories that support the use case. We need some copy for the website. We need a talk script for the sellers. We need an initial set of outreach emails or templates for our BDR function to be able to use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what are those things that you need out of the gate for the representative size of what you're doing? So in software, you could have a feature release that maybe is smaller than a whole product release. So maybe you don't need all of that stuff if it's just a feature release, and maybe that's just you make some updates to some existing materials. But for a full product release, something brand new, then you need the full bill of materials. So figuring out ahead of time what the size and scope of that bill of materials is, peg back to what you're trying to do. Feature release, product release, maybe there's a merger and acquisition. And so you've got to talk about how you incorporate this new product into the set. That's a different bill of materials. So creating those bill of materials could be a checklist. It could be in a Word document or whatever. It could be slides, however you decide to do it. But it's super imperative that you have it done. From that bill of materials, then you need to develop an SLA around the time frame and the deliverables. Because as you sit between these two sides of the business, the technical and the go-to-market side, there are materials that you need to have delivered to you. So for example, from the engineering team, you might need things like product specs or like a description of what this new feature actually does. And then you also have materials that you need to deliver to others in the business. It might be a sales enablement team. It might be others in the marketing team. So creating those SLAs around the timeframes and then the deliverables. So an example might be with 2 months before we're going to launch this product, I need to have A, B, C, and D from the engineering team mapped out so that I can then go and create the slide and the one pager and get the customer story, that kind of thing. Once I have those, then, it'll be a turnaround time of 3 weeks or 4 weeks to get these materials done. And so establishing all of this stuff ahead of time, I know it's not like glamorous or the fun part of the job, but if you can get ahead of it before you're in the middle of it, it's going to save you a lot of headache down the road.
I think that makes a ton of sense. So some of the basics, project management, execution, let's have a playbook. I like the definition of the product within a product, the bill of materials. I think that makes a ton of sense, but agreed that I don't see all organizations necessarily at that level of operations right now.
Yeah. And then from that, once you get all that stuff kind of out of the way, that's the less fun, but it is vital. Then there are some other ways that sort of on an ongoing basis be operationalizing what you're doing. And so I think, an obvious one is if your organization is doing quarterly business reviews with customers or having some sort of meetings with customers, your product marketers should be participating in those. Now, not all of them, But some of them, because you need to get in front of customers and you need to hear what the selling arm of the organization is saying, and you need to hear what the customers are saying. Also, you need to over communicate internally. So product marketing creates a lot of materials, and oftentimes those materials don't get used because people don't know they exist. And so whether that's creating a summary of all the stuff we did this month or finding some sort of a system, could be something as, like a SharePoint, or it could be a tool that's more specifically designed for this, but figuring out like, how do I communicate? Who needs to know what? And then how do I over communicate? This idea of like strategy is like a bucket filled with water that's got a hole in the bottom and it drips out, right? And then when the water's all gone and you think you're done is when you need to start filling it back up. It's kind of the way it is with communicating about this stuff, because every day I get at least one message from someone in the organization. Hey, would you create me A, B, C, and D? And I, can get back to them and say, okay, yeah, thank you for the request. Appreciate it. How is what you're envisioning or your ask different from these 4 things over here? And 9 times out of 10, they go, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize those existed. That's perfect. I don't need you to create anything new. So figuring out ways to communicate that stuff is really important. I think it's also really important to get a good handle on creating some sort of database. Again, it could be a spreadsheet or it could be something more robust around your customer stories. So there's going to be published customer stories that are on the website or in the slide deck or whatever. And then there's the ad hoc ones that you hear as part of those quarterly business reviews. But you want to organize these things like nobody's business, right? So by product, by region, by use case, by, whatever else is going to be relevant, because you want to be able to tell the story of what an actual customer is doing that aligns to the needs or the use case that the prospect has. And so the way that you you help sellers get their mind around this is you go, oh, hey, that reminds me of so-and-so over here. Let me tell you what they're doing. And then that prospect goes, oh, wow, that does sound a lot like us or our problem or what we're trying to solve. So finding a way to organize and track all of those customer stories, both the formal ones and the informal ones, is going to be hugely important for product marketing. And then I think just, kind of round out this question, the ability to communicate to customers in multiple mediums. I already mentioned the video or the podcast before, but also just like you need to over communicate to your internal audience, you need to over communicate with your customers. We participate in a lot of analyst reports with like Forrester and Gartner and IDC and stuff. And occasionally we'll get back like, oh, this product's great. We love it and everything. But one of the cons is, customers reported they didn't know what was going on with the product roadmap. That kind of stuff drives me crazy. That's the kind of thing that makes me insane, because I'm like, but we did this and we did this and we did this. And then I go, you know what though? I can't blame our customer. Customer's always right. That's on me. So if we did the 3 things, maybe we should have done the 4 or the 5 things. For whatever reason, they're not hearing it. They don't know where to look. They don't know who to talk to. So you need to kind of figure out those multiple mediums that you could reach customers in every possible place, and then get creative with that. At Optimize, we were really big on experimentation, partially because we sell tools that help organizations with experimentation, but also as a culture, we think it's really valuable. And so I like to make sure that we are coming up with 1 experiment per month that we can do that will help us test whether a customer gets better messaging about what's going on with the product. So is it putting something out there on LinkedIn, right? Like a little thing like, hey, did you know that this feature existed? 9 times out of 10, people probably don't know. Or is it you create something on your website where you have a running total of all of the highlights that were released, and then you point people back to that? Is it you send out an email with an invitation to a webinar? Or do you chunk these videos out into smaller, digestible 5 or 10 minute things rather than a full hour-long presentation? So figuring out how do you experiment with communicating the message, and then just go and test it. Some of them will work. Some of them will be like, meh, not so much. But I think anytime you can get better at communicating with the customers what's going on, you're going to be better served by that, even if each individual experiment doesn't always work out.
No, absolutely. Test and learn across the organization. I think that is so important. We see the same thing. I like going back to your comment about SLAs and kind of the medium between product and customer, because in other parts of the organization, we often talk about organizations being product-led, sales-led, or marketing-led. For digital products, though, I'm just wondering what you think it takes for product marketers and those product engineers to work together to communicate clearly, to develop what I'll just call value-based selling so that marketing and sales isn't overcommitting the product. The product is totally missing the mark on customer feedback and, what the market need is. Do you think this relationship has evolved at all as modern product development processes have evolved, or is it still a little bit of a struggle?
So I think in software, at least, the relationship between the engineering side of the business and the selling arm of that, which is marketing and sales, has gotten better. Obviously, we can always improve with that, but you really need to have open dialogue between those product owners and then the product marketers. For my team, we have regular routine connection points, standing meetings with folks and making sure that we're being very open and honest about what is realistic on the product roadmap. Sometimes, there are delays that happen or things that come up that mean, well, we're not going to be able to ship this when we thought we were. Everyone needs to know about that and communicate that really well. So having those routine connection points to make sure that everyone's staying on track is really helpful. It's also important too, I think, for product marketing to speak into the product development process as well. So not just be on the receiving end, it needs to be a two-way street. And so if the product marketing folks are out there and actually having those conversations, participating in those QBRs, talking to sales like they should be, they need to be able to have a voice into the product as well. And I don't know that that is always the case. I know at Optimizely, we could be better at that even, being totally transparent. This is something that we could be better at as product marketers to say, well, hey, have you thought about this as we build new applications or new functionality within our product stack there? So having that two-way dialogue is really important. I think also being realistic about why you're doing something. Are we just creating something because someone in engineering thought it was really cool? It happens, right? Are we doing something because there's a business value to it? That maybe if you make this change in your code base, it ends up saving you a bunch of money down the road because it optimizes your server usage and minimizes the amount of data storage you have, as an example. So there are things that you do just as a business to say, hey, business-wise, we're going to do this because it has a business impact. Okay, great. That's a totally legitimate reason to do something, but let's be clear about that. Or is it because you're trying to keep up with a competitor? Competitor X released this new thing. We don't have it. We got to go and build it ourselves so that we can stay in parity. Or it might be like, hey, we're out in front. And if we do this, it will allow us to remain in front. So I think trying to define why it is that you're making changes to the product or making additions is really important, and being very clear about that with everyone involved so that we know, hey, this effort over here is to solve this particular part of the business. It may not have a sales implication, or maybe it is the thing that we're betting the company on. Back to the experimentation part again, right? Not many organizations are doing waterfall development anymore, but sometimes even with an agile organization, it does seem more waterfall-like in the sense that you spend a whole bunch of effort to deliver a product, especially, the bigger you go with a release. So is there a way to maybe chunk that into smaller parts so that you can not have to wait so long and not have to get so far down an engineering road before you're like, oh boy, we should have pivoted a month ago and gone in a different direction. So those are kind of, some thoughts around how do you think about having the engineering side and the product marketing side work together in kind of almost a symbiotic relationship so that both sides of the organization are getting value from it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think we've also seen some progress in that relationship. I don't think I've seen anything so progressive as, the marketing people writing user acceptance criteria on the user stories for the product. But could you see it going that way?
There is this movement now, especially in tech, around this idea of product-led growth, right? Now, are we getting down to the point where marketers are going to write the stories? Probably not. There will still be, that function will live within product, but it doesn't mean that marketers can't influence that or at least provide suggestions. And as organizations experiment with this idea of product-led growth and how do you drive growth through getting adoption of an application, there is going to be more and more of that overlap between the marketing function and the product side of the business. And it's because it's more iterative and it moves very quickly, and you're going to do that MVP discussion or project or whatever it is you're going to do that much more quickly and much more deliberate and being able to get something quick to the market, test it, see if it's working, see if people like it. And so as product-led growth continues, I don't think it's going to go away. I even see like large enterprise vendors trying to figure out, like, is there some area of the application that we can kind of quarter off a little bit that to provide someone that, user experience and be like, oh, I like this thing. Now I want more.
Right. Yes.
Right. So if large enterprises are figuring out how to do this, then obviously a smaller tech company that is selling to the SMB or the mid-market, they're certainly going to do it. And so maybe not to the point that you originally brought up where we're writing all the stories, but I think there's going to be a blurring of that line a little bit as we move forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually it leads me to my final question. It's funny that you phrased it that way. We always think about, and I'm being general here, we always think about startups and smaller digital product companies as being very disruptive and being very progressive. And maybe, in fact, their marketers would be writing the user stories. And we think of big companies as more legacy in their thinking. But in fact, you're right. We've seen a lot of bigger companies starting to adopt more agile practices in general. But is there anything else that you see big companies doing, making mistakes? And when I say big companies, I do mean like the bigger digital product companies continuing to make some mistakes when they bring digital products to the market today. Is there anything they can learn from smaller emerging product companies, or are those lines blurring too?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I do think, to what you just said, there are things that both sides organizations can learn from the other. Right? It's not a one-way deal, right? Obviously, larger companies, sometimes they tend to be slow to react to changes in the market, and the pace of change has gotten so fast now that even being a little bit slow means potentially lifetime of being behind. So being too slow or being really conservative with investing. So right now, money is super cheap, and you can see it in the headlines all the time that organizations are making acquisitions. They're being strategic with the way they spend their money. But not every organization is doing that. And so those that kind of get behind the 8 ball are going to have a really difficult time innovating if they're being really tight with their finances. And then I think in larger organizations, you get this either being driven by the stock price. Stock price went down 5% and investors are not happy. Okay, we got to make changes, or continuous change from a leadership perspective that changes or pivots the organization before certain things have a chance to actually take root. So I do think that larger organizations are getting better. I can think of a number of organizations. I live in the Minneapolis area. We have a number of Fortune 500s in town. And I can think of some very large Fortune 500 financial institutions, as an example, headquartered here. And you might think, oh, Fortune 500 financial institution, they're not going to be the most nimble. Well, you know what? They're spinning up innovation labs that sit within the organization. And their sole task is like, how do we figure out how to change a legacy bank into a nimble tech company? That's fantastic. I love it. I love hearing those stories. And you see it within manufacturing. You obviously see it within software. And so I think larger organizations are finding ways, even within the behemoth of the enterprise, to innovate and be faster and be nimble and experiment and learn quickly so that they don't get left behind. On the flip side, smaller companies could learn a lot from larger organizations when it comes to things around process. Like, I've worked in small organizations. Oftentimes there's no process at all, which will get you so far. But eventually you get to a point where it's like, this is actually a problem that we don't have a process. Or some smaller organizations, especially in tech, are driven by that charismatic founder, CEO who's got a vision. And sometimes that can be tunnel vision. And you don't have the experience as an organization to say, wait a minute, we need to slow down a little bit here, solicit more input, make sure we're talking to our customers, make sure we're talking to others in the know, and make sure that we do this right, rather than just kind of forging ahead because charismatic leader person thinks this is the right way to go. The world is just littered with tech companies that raised a bunch of money and then fizzled out when the money ran out. And I think it's because they don't always take the lessons from the bigger organizations that have learned how to maybe do things a little bit more strategically or a little bit more purposefully as they bring products to market. So I think, both sides organizations can learn from each other. And the ones that recognize that are the ones that will be the leaders. The ones that don't will be the ones that go away. Look at the Fortune 500 list. If you look at that 50 years ago versus today, over half the companies that are Fortune 500 today didn't exist 50 years ago. And many of the ones that were number 1, number 2, number 10 are either not on the Fortune 500 anymore, or they've shrank much lower on the list.
Yeah, right. The spectacular flameouts that we've all seen.
Yeah, exactly. If history has told us anything, right, it's that nothing is permanent. And so you need to always be learning and adapting and growing as an organization. And I do think that that's one of the reasons why I love product marketing, because we get to be kind of at the intersection of all of that stuff and helping guide the organization through some of that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate your time and your insights here, especially when it comes to some of these very, I think, actionable nuggets. We love to talk about those things in the podcast. Like, what can you do today? What can you think about in the next hour to try and improve the business a little bit? And I think you've certainly provided a lot of that today, Mike. So we're really grateful to have you on. Thank you again for your time. Any final thoughts?
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great. I can talk about marketing and software and technology all day long. And so thank you for giving me an outlet. My wife is very tired of hearing about it. But to your point, if you could do one thing today, book a meeting with a customer and just talk to them for a half an hour. Like, if you take away nothing from this, it's that you should, by the end of the week, have a meeting with a customer, or at least have one on the calendar with a customer, so you can hear what's going on in their business and learn from them.
That's great advice. Thanks again, Mike, so much. And we'll hear you all on the next podcast.
Thank you very much.
Now it's time for our namesake segment, What If, So What, and most importantly, Now What? Jim, what are your thoughts on what Mike had to say about all things marketing evolution, product marketing operations, and innovation?
Innovation. That's the key word this round.
Yeah.
What a great guest. I think Mike demonstrated a lot of depth and a lot of breadth. And I think the key takeaway for me was breadth. I think we're going to cover a lot of that today. But I think there are a couple things that stood out to me. One, he talked about what he looks for in a marketer, and then he kind of drilled down on specifically product marketing techniques, which I thought was interesting and makes sense, for his role at Optimizely. But when he described what he looks for in a marketer, I heard a lot of traits that we're looking for across the board. He talked about being naturally curious. He talked about being a problem solver. That's just, resiliency comes to mind. Just a key skill that a lot of people have to have. But maybe, this is kind of new problem for marketers. I think we'll get into underlying reasons why. Communications, again, kind of just golden skill set that folks have. Multimedia skills, for sure. I mean, we'll talk about how the proliferation of digital has affected the marketer in different ways. Certainly, last but certainly not least, passion for the customer. The idea of sort of falling in love with your customer every day. Sometimes we have to work hard at that, but I think that's pervasive as well. And again, goes beyond marketing. So I thought that was great advice for marketers, but probably for everybody. Product marketing specifically is really interesting to me because we think about products from a consumer perspective or a packaged product perspective, but I think the product marketing concept is making its way into a lot of internal organizations as well, because, again, as digital makes its way through every facet of the organization, there are products at all levels, and all kinds of customers, both outside and internal. So the idea of having good project management, what he called a bill of materials. So what are the elements, the components, the templates, the decks, the scripts that you need to pull together for any marketing situation or customer situation, good service level agreements, because we're going to have a lot of people working together to deliver on the marketing mission. And back to communicating or even over communicating, at the end of the day, this is a lot to ask and a lot to do. I don't think that's limited to marketing, but I think he's really highlighting why that is relatively new or a special case for marketing. So what did you hear, Kim? What did you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Mike was a great guest, and I love how tangible and specific he was able to get in terms of skill sets and personality types. And I thought that was great. It felt to me, and I was surprised to hear, that some of the basics of marketing execution still needs to be spelled out. So I think a lot of the things that he was looking at through the lens of product marketing still really apply to marketing teams in general, if not all delivery teams in an organization. one of my takeaways was a question. Are marketing teams still on autopilot, or is marketing, particularly product marketing, at the tipping point for real change in terms of how you operationalize and how those teams actually bring a product to market? So I guess what I heard that was a little unique to product marketing, similar to your list, that curiosity, like you said, but I like the way he equated curiosity to hustle. We talk a lot about that and as an important quality. So I like that a lot. I liked his comment about being able to see opportunity where others don't necessarily see opportunity. And I kind of extrapolated that to mean storytelling and maybe ways to tell the right story at the right time through the right channel. The ability to communicate the technical aspects of a product. It bears repeating because I think we've seen that over and over and over. And I think our conversation about, well, can't your product managers be the marketers? Can't your marketers be the product managers? I think that's where that Venn diagram doesn't cross over. I think there's a lot of great product managers who just cannot communicate the value of, the technical aspects of a product the way a marketer can. And then really understanding the different mediums and channels that customers and consumers use today. Showing my age here a little bit, but TikTok is a really good emerging marketing platform that if I were a marketer at my age, I'd be a little bit lost. So I think really leveraging the right platforms for the right audience at the right time, I think is some key product marketing skill set. I really also started hearing and formulating this hypothesis in my head that for product marketing in particular, maybe specialization is where the discipline needs to be headed within the broader skill sets. So not generalists, and that is across big and small companies. Does specialization include more than cross-pollinating between marketing and development? Does it need to go broader, or does it need to go more narrow, given the product marketing skill set demand? So I'm formulating kind of my hypothesis on specialization, generalization. And then my other thought was, does innovation come from getting back to the basics of marketing ops? I just keep coming back to my initial surprise that Mike felt very strongly you had to break it down at a very task. I love the bill of materials. I love the SLA. That seems basic, but maybe that's where the innovation can actually come from in marketing today. But what do you think, Jim? What's the what if here?
I want to respond to your recap, and I'm going to set this all up because I have a what if. I do think execution is difficult for this reason, because things are changing all the time. I think when, regardless of the department, regardless of your business, you get good at something and then it changes. Like the mission changes, the direction changes. As soon as you master it, you've got to change the way you're doing it. So, then it feels like you're starting over again. So the way around that is focus on results, right? So why am I doing this? What are the outcomes I'm looking for? And just recognize that, the execution model is always mutating or evolving. So I guess I'd give everyone a break in that regard. But I think that specialization is sort of inevitable. I think there's just too much to do. And so I want to set this up. And I think of when you say marketing, that includes a lot of things. It's like saying engineering when we have, civil engineering and computer engineering and mechanical engineering, or you say customer service. That's another one. Sort of like marketing, we think of customer service as like a 1-800 number or a hotline. And so for those agents, you have to provide service management, right? Maybe there's something they have to do. You call to activate your subscription, and of course, we're automating a lot of that, but there's problem management. And by the way, while I have you on the line and you want to cancel your subscription, I'm going to keep you on the line and upsell, right. Even though you're having a problem, right? So we're asking, a lot of departments to do a lot of things. So I guess I give a little bit of a break here, but I think when you look at just marketing in particular, there's a lot we ask them to do. We ask them to be brand experts and brand ambassadors, do demand gen, drive leads, enable the sales force, provide sales support. You've got to deal with, you mentioned the product owners and managers. You got to deal with sales. You got to deal with the events team. You got to deal with the agencies. You got to deal with the venues, and, you've got to be in, Sprinkler in the morning, and then WordPress, and then back in InDesign, and then back to Sprinkler, and then Photoshop and Pardot and Illustrator. and Asana. I mean, it just goes, there's a lot we're asking for. And I think there's a lot of reasons why it's harder than ever. I think it goes back to, the way consumer behaviors have changed, and which obviously is going to affect the way we market and sell. So digital has disrupted consumer behavior. We've given them choice and transparency. They have a lot of options, and so as marketers and in service and sales, we have to respond in an omni-channel way. So all that creates fragmentation. And I was thinking back to a study we did for General Mills on a few years ago on food and grocery buying habits. And if you go way back, as a consumer, under consideration, you'd look at print and broadcast, so newspaper circular. Maybe you caught a broadcast ad. Your evaluation decisions were Coke or Pepsi. That was it. and it was all done at the grocery store. Today, you're being bombarded by print, broadcast, web, social. You've got to evaluate not just the brand, but is it organic? Is it fair trade, gluten-free, heart healthy, keto, local, GMO, made in the USA, pumpkin spice? Like all that is on the table. You got to sort through all of that. And then am I going to the grocery store, the C-store, warehouse, specialty, online? And then it gets worse. So, you've got not just for the marketer, right? Not for the consumer. The consumer, it's getting better. But the marketer, it's not just the products, it's services. We talk a lot about use over ownership, right? So, we know a lot of automotive companies are focusing on not just selling products, but how do I provide mobility, rental, ride sharing, and so on. And by the way, it keeps going. I got to do that globally. And that's an even deeper commitment. So if we step all the way back, there were 4 Ps in marketing: product, price, place, and promotion. I checked last night. I saw 12: product, price, place, promotion. I'm going to keep going. Purpose, promise, principles, people, personas, positioning, proof points, and process. So that's a lot. So here's my what if. What if there are 100 Ps of marketing? So I'm going to be a little off kilter today. That's my what if. And I think there's a good reason for it. That's the empathy I'm putting on the table. So what, Kim?
No, I think that's a good observation. It's a good what if, because the 12 Ps sort of belie the need for maybe a more narrow focus to have successful business outcomes. And I actually am really reminded of our episode with Lisa Bowen as she was talking about the evolution of the CMO and sort of the left brain and right brain having to come together at that C level. But her perspective was, she doesn't have to know it all because she's relying on her team of specialists who can bring that left brain and that right brain together. So I think it's okay if there are 100 Ps as long as you have the right support system for that. And that brings me to my so what. We didn't get a chance to explicitly ask Mike how his perspectives on marketing and product marketing roles in particular help companies innovate. But I'm going to take a crack at it based on some of his insights, and maybe he'll come back and let us know what he thought. So he talked about some of the different innovation you can apply to software products and how to operationalize marketing with some basics in project management. But my big so what after talking to Mike is, so what? Digital is pervasive and ubiquitous, like you mentioned earlier. It's going to continue to evolve rapidly, but we aren't going back to marketing via PowerPoint anytime soon. And that never really worked anyway. As Edward Tufte, I think a lot of people are familiar with, but he's a Yale statistician and really a pioneer in data visualization, said PowerPoint presentations too often resemble a school play. Very loud, very slow, and very simple. And what he means by that is just it doesn't communicate it's not the medium to communicate the right information to the right people at the right time, but it's sort of this de facto marketing tool that we seem to keep devolving to. So I think the so what is, today's rising marketers, so not the CMO levels, but the rising marketers need robust digital skill sets and specialization, I think, within certain mediums, whether that's social media, paid media, SEO, podcasting, and maybe there is
another P.
Yeah,
podcast. Yeah. 101 Ps.
Analytics I'll throw in there, or, perhaps within each specialization, you also have to be specialized on your KPIs for your medium. I think to have a broad communication skill set is still foundational, but it doesn't help companies innovate or differentiate. And both small and large companies suffer from some outdated marketing techniques and lack of marketing project management rigor. I think Tufte also has been quoted as saying, in general, I think audiences are a lot smarter than people think. So it's not know your audience, it's respect your audience and really know your content, which I think for a product marketing area is great. Taking that Tufte quote to heart, it's about specialization in the medium to tell a story that moves people. That is so important for all marketers, but for product marketers in particular. To be successful, you have to, like Mike said, fall in love with your customer, and a core foundation of love is respect, right, Jim?
Now that is, we're covering a lot of territory. This became sort of a relationship advice
very philosophical.
Podcast.
Yeah. We've gone there before.
Well, relationships are important. I mean, again, that's so many levels, internally, externally. My good friend John always talks about, I think I've shared this with you, he talks about romancing the customer. It's not as, icky as it sounds, but, it's imagining what life would be like together, and I think there's some truth to that, right? But it really is, relationship. And I like the idea of respect. So to sort of formulate a now what, I think Mike, for me, we kind of triggered me, really moved me with his suggestion, which was everyone go out today or tomorrow and reach out to a customer, understand the customer, go into your store, sit in on a call. I think we talked about this before, like ride along.
Yes.
It really forms of empathy, but I just think that's still so powerful. The fly on the wall approach, open up your perspective, ask questions, what's working, what isn't working, where you're going, why. And I think, especially for the marketer, that works internally as well, because it is a complex orchestration, right? For a brand, for a company, full of people and process and warehouses and supply chains, to pull all those things together, and then build that relationship with your customers. So, I think looking outside, understanding that, and talking internally is important as well. And we keep coming back to these themes, around empathy. And I think that's also, to tie this back to innovation, foundational for selecting and identifying the right innovations. And, it takes the courage to do that, to make the changes. So I'm really happy we did this interview, Kim. I love your takeaways. There's a lot to do. I hope there are some marketers out there for whom this means something, or they've seen something different, and non-marketers too. Because we've got to orchestrate this process together.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good now what, and you're right. We do keep coming back to topics around empathy and asking the questions. And I'll tie it back to the relationship again. How do you build a relationship if you don't talk, if you don't have that two-way communication? And then as marketers, what do you do with what you've learned? And I think maybe I'll add a little more specificity to your now what, because I agree. Allow marketers to talk to customers. I don't see that enough in organizations. So I think that might be another sub now what. But great talking today, Jim, as always.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks to Mike Bernard again. Thanks to everyone for listening today. And until next time, keep asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what?
You've been listening to What If, So What, the digital strategy podcast from Perficient with Jim Hertzfeld and Kim Chopek. We want to thank our Perficient colleague, JD Norman, for our music today. Subscribe to the podcast and don't miss a single episode. You can find this season along with show notes at perficient.com. Thanks for listening.